Okay, welcome back. We're on chapter 6 of social psychology for UNISA, PYC3701. We're looking at prejudice, stereotyping, and discrimination. Today is the day that South Africa has officially won the prize as the most unequal country out of 174 countries. Congratulations to us. So let's get started. We clearly have a lot to learn. Causes, effects, and remedies, cures for the problem. What is prejudice? Prejudice is affect, feeling, or emotion. So it's negative, emotional responses to members of a group. Discrimination. Discrimination is behavior. Different treatment based on group membership. Stereotyping. Cognitive. Beliefs about members of a group. Okay, this is about loss aversion, a short video. And loss aversion is theorized about using prospect theory. Prospect theory is all about fear. People are risk averse. The risk of loss outweighs gains in most people's minds. So previously privileged groups resist social equalization very strongly because it feels like a loss, and that brings up a lot of fear. Here's prospect theory explained. The glass ceiling effect. This is for women. There are barriers and prejudices that stop women getting to the top. Except in the glass cliff effect. When a company is at risk of failure, then suddenly it is more likely to get women into leadership. This may be a good idea because statistically it seems to be that companies and organizations that are led by women perform better than those led by men. Okay, tokenism. What is tokenism? When you go through the motions of inclusion, in order to allay accusations of exclusion without really sharing power. A single representative of an out-group gets admitted to leadership. Both the in-group and the out-group now see the playing field as even. The out-group is seen as less capable than the in-group peers, especially if their quote is, oh, she didn't get the job out of merit, she got the job because of the color of her skin. And their performance is negatively affected by stereotype threat. So what is stereotype threat? This is when people feel like they're going to be judged in terms of a negative stereotype about their group or their performance, or that they're going to confirm a negative stereotype about their group. That's stereotype threat. Here's a little test. Shifting standards. What are shifting standards? You apply one standard to one group and another standard to another group. Sometimes sensible, sometimes not. Objective scales. When you measure everything objectively and with standard measurements across the board. Subjective scales. When you interpret things according to meanings and group membership and other factors. Stereotypes. Stereotypes act as heuristic schemas and prototypes. They save us energy in assessing people as parts of groups or social categories. So we notice what we expect to see. And if we see someone who doesn't fit into what we don't expect, we put them in a special category all of their own. For example, Johnny Clegg was put into, oh, he's a white Zulu. It's not like, oh, white people and Zulu people can mingle. All right. So therefore, stereotypes tend to be stable. They're very resistant to change. So only when intergroup relationships change in general do stereotypes change. They actually seem to lag behind reality somewhat. Out-group homogeneity. Okay, so when we think about our in-group, we think that everybody in it is an individual. We're all so different. When we look at the out-group, we think they all look the same. All right? In-group differentiation, so unique, and out-group generalization. Another aspect is the fundamental attribution error or correspondence bias, the positive feedback loop. Do you remember what that is? What it is that you attribute other people's behavior to traits. That's just who they are. Okay, and our own behavior is because of the situation. I'm really not a thief. It's just that it was just lying there, and I thought it ought to, under the circumstances, no one was ever going to know who to give it back to. A biologically based feature that is used to distinguish one group and another often justifies differential treatment of those groups. It's called the essence. All right. Okay, you test yourself there. All right, let's look at affect again. Remember what this, not affect, this is. What is this? Prejudice. Okay. There are specific negative emotions towards outgroups, and sometimes it's a specific emotion for each outgroup, okay? As a predominant negative emotion. Fear, arguably the most dangerous and potent of emotions. Anger, disgust, envy, pity, and guilt. Outgroup prejudice can arise from incidental feelings of anger in particular. So if I stub my toe just before I meet your people, I might hate you forever, okay? So if you induce feeling sympathy or just before the target is encountered, then, and it's incidental, it's in no way connected, you have a strong likelihood that it's going to affect judgments of the target, giving rise to negative stereotypes, prejudices, and discrimination. Implicit association, this is the underlying heuristics. These are semi-conscious or unconscious associations between group membership and trait evaluation. They can be automatically activated. Okay, this is a scary video. Go watch it, it's hectic. Okay, causes of prejudice. Threat to personal or group interests. Competition for scarce resources. And belonging to and feeling loyal to an in-group. Let's look at threat. Any threat to the self or the in-group is a potent trigger for prejudice. It leads to negative evaluations of the out-group, and when you diss the out-group, you feel like you guys are better. It improves self-esteem and esteem of the in-group. Here's an example of threat in action. All right, overall, advantaged groups become more strongly prejudiced towards disadvantaged groups when they experience a threat to their interests or self-esteem. In other words, you can get a stronger backlash when equality is increasing. Although I'm not sure that this is true in the South African context, it's certainly historically true in many contexts. It is true in the South African context. But I'm not, anyway, it's complicated. It is complicated. Let's move on. Causes of prejudice. Threat to personal or group interests. Competition for scarce resources. Let's look at competition. Sometimes there's a zero-sum game in which the winner takes all. If we look at the current fight between truck drivers, Zimbabwean and South African, you're either in that truck or someone else is. It's a zero-sum game for each individual who's in that competition and that conflict. Realistic conflict theory. Realistic conflict theory says that there's no real conflict until there's scarcity. As soon as there's scarcity, conflict arises. As conflict escalates, so too does prejudice. Causes of prejudice. So we have threat, competition, and belonging to and feeling loyal to an in-group. Belonging and loyalty. According to social identity theory, social categorization alone is sufficient to create prejudice. As soon as you go, this is these people and that's those people, prejudice follows. Okay, this is what research does tend to bear out. The people with the blue ties and the people with the red ties. The people with the blue ties are better. Some prejudice may be viewed as legitimate. We all regard some prejudice as legitimate, such as against criminals, for example. But some prejudice will be seen as illegitimate, such as against homeless people, because it's not just. All right, let's look at belonging and being part of the in-group. Once you are deeply fused with your group, you are willing to die to protect it and to kill to protect it. The relative deprivation theory. This is feelings of discontent and perceptions of inequality because you're getting less than you deserve, right? Very strong motivation to act gives rise to quite a lot of bitterness and resentment and anger. And negative self-esteem. I am not getting it, and everyone else is. People like to get the same as everyone else. Okay, so here's someone talking about one kind of relative deprivation theory. Okay. But there are three types. Personal in-group deprivation. My group is doing well, but I'm not doing well in my group. Personal out-group deprivation. They're doing well, and I'm not doing well. And it's because they are those people and I'm this people. In-group, out-group deprivation. All those people always do well, and we never get anything. Okay. If the deprivation is seen as in-group, out-group, stable over time, and illegitimate, then this generates militancy. And also more prejudice. So on the one hand, it can really create cohesion and strength in acting together, but it can also lead into hatred and conflict, high conflict. Okay. All right, the Cantrell Ladder Quiz. The Cantrell Ladder Quiz measures how you see your life as it is and how you would like it to be. And you can do it yourself. Now, this was in the happy days of 2012. And if you look at the chart, you can see that, okay, on top we have Black people who say, okay, we think life is going to get better and better and better. It was terrible. It's really not too bad right now. In fact, it's pretty good, and it's going to get better. This was 10 years ago. I think things have changed radically since now. Colored people said, oh, things were a little bit better in the past. They're a little bit worse, but we think they're going to get maybe a tiny bit better in the future. No, in fact, quite a bit better in the future. Okay. Then Indian people were like, yeah, it was a bit better in the past. We think it's going to stay pretty much as it is going forward, but it's not too bad. White people are like, well, it was good. Now we're here, it's kind of okay, 50%, and it's going to be terrible. Okay, so let's go on. Authoritarianism and prejudice. You can do an interesting test on the F scale. There's a link there for fascism. There does seem to be a fairly clear correlation between authoritarianism and prejudice, and also between social learning and prejudice, what you're taught to believe about others, and between social learning and authoritarianism. It's a learned social convention. However, how do you separate it from ideological and social positions? You can't use it objectively. It's pointing to something. There's definitely something there. But you can't separate it out as an individual causal factor. Discrimination. Remember, discrimination is the behavioral one. So nowadays, discrimination is legislated against, but there are still hate crimes and disguised forms of discrimination. There are many fascist and proto-fascist groups, apparently funded by Russia, actually, calling for increased discrimination all around the world, and partially driven by social media, where people form silos and actually egg one another on to do genocide and other things. This famously happened in Myanmar. In every single major religious affiliation at the moment, there are fascist and proto-fascist discriminatory groups rising. And I think South Africa is a hotspot, one of many. Modern racism. Now that racism is illegal, what form does it take? It's still very much with us. So publicly, the people in the elite say, oh, we're colorblind. I don't see black or white or colored or Indian. We're all the same. Okay, but when I'm with my peers, I may be bigoted, right? People behind closed doors start saying nasty things about other people. And believing minorities are getting unfair benefits. All they have to do is show up and say, hi, my name is da-da-da-da, and they get the job, and I'm so qualified, and nobody gives me a chance, and blah, blah. All right. And deny the negative effects of discrimination. Oh, apartheid wasn't so bad. We looked after people, we educated them, whatever. Okay. Built hospitals for them. By comparing themselves with extremists, people can feel that they're not bigoted. I say, oh, well, you know, you think I'm bad. You should see what they did in wherever. Okay. Modern racism. Racial attitudes may be implicit or explicit. Explicit attitudes are often congruent with beliefs and attitudes. It's a conscious choice. It's what you think. It fits into your opinions. Implicit attitudes are latent and heuristic rather than ideological. And so this is why you can have implicit attitudes against your own group, which is interesting. So you can go and check it at the Harvard Implicit Association test, which you can go visit. It's great fun, but it does tend to suck you in a bit. Bona fide pipeline. How do you know if you're accurately measuring the implicit associations? You do it by using priming. Remember priming? Collective guilt. When your in-group has mistreated other groups, it gives rise to collective guilt. To minimize this uncomfortable feeling, people may victim blame, dehumanize the victims, so you don't feel anything for them, morally disengage, and easily forget the harm that their group has done. Little test. Stopping prejudice. Learning not to hate. Contact. Recategorization. Working constructively with guilt. Motivating people to say no to prejudice. And social influence. Learning not to hate. Children copy their parents and want to make them proud. So parents need to become aware of their own prejudices and work on overcoming them and be encouraged to do so to help the children to grow up without social discrimination. Children need to learn to tolerate difference and be respectful. Learning not to hate. Next is contact. All right, so in South Africa, there's been quite a bit of research and effort put into contact to help reduce racism and bring people together. The contact hypothesis is that increased contact between groups reduces prejudice. But there are very specific conditions that are needed for this to actually happen. If you just throw a bunch of groups together in the same space, what happens is that they all form their own little silos and they don't necessarily mix. And it could be that that contact may even increase hostility and prejudice instead of decreasing it. Okay? Proximity alone is not enough. What do you need for it to work? You need recognition of similarities. We are all people. There must not be norms in the in-group that are against the other group. There must be friendships between members of the groups. These factors reduce anxiety, but that's the next, just the foundation for the next set of requirements, which are also necessary. Preconditions. They need to be equal in status. You can't have groups seeing one another as above and below. There must be cooperation and interdependence. They need to need one another. They need to get to know one another one-on-one. There need to be equality norms for the groups. There needs to be institutional support. It needs to be structured and managed so that you don't fall into any bear traps. And participants should view one another as typical group representatives. Okay, you are a typical person of that group, and I'm a typical person of this group. So I like you, therefore I like your group. I like the people of your group. Contact. Also, contact needs to be pleasant and not too contentious. You don't want to trigger fear and anger. You don't want to go into the threat world. Okay, so if you don't have this, you may actually increase prejudice. People really need to feel safe, and you need to create safety and give people time to come together. Can't have threat and intergroup anxiety. Recategorization. This is a beautiful video. Beautiful. The theory is the common in-group identity model. The members of different groups identify themselves as members of a single social identity. Positive contact will increase and intergroup bias will decrease. As then boundaries weaken, and this becomes a positive feedback process that reduces intergroup bias, such as people who convert to Islam. It brings people of all races together as Muslims, okay? And then in that way, racism falls away in a positive feedback loop because everyone sees themselves as Muslim brothers and sisters. And people need to work cooperatively towards a shared goal to also create a shared social identity, which is why things like Rugby World Cups are so important for us. Stopping prejudice. So we had learning not to hate, contact, recategorization, working constructively with guilt. Okay, you can use collective guilt to reduce prejudice and to mobilize for the right things to happen. Motivating people by creating new norms of equality and respect, saying no to stereotypes, and treating people as individuals. You can help people to reduce and reverse stereotypes. After stereotype negation training, people didn't show implicit racial biases we tested in an experiment. In other words, you can prove that you can teach people not to be prejudiced. Okay, it can be done. There's a beautiful video about that. Okay, so let's look at the next one. This is the last one. Social influence. Okay, when people believe equality is the norm, they become less prejudiced. No one wants to stand out as the only bigot in town, okay? You're only a bigot when you feel like other people are bigots too. Here's a test, and that is the end. So, good luck. It was a fun video, and I'll see you in chapter 7. Okay, bye.